Welcome everybody to our very first webinar, QMS in MedTech webinar. So today we're going to be going over a series of innovations and operations in medical technology development. So this series is going to examine some operational processes that are needed to bring these advancements to market. This is a part of a larger series that we hope to embark in. So stay tuned. And with that, I leave it up to Rakesh.
Yep. Thank you, Steph. For everyone, thank you guys for joining. My name is Rakesh Lal. I'm founder of RX Device Consulting and really happy to be a co-host of this webinar series. The series is sponsored by RX Device Consulting and Boston Biotech Advisors. At RX Device Consulting, we provide product development, regulatory compliance, and market authorization and access services to manufacturers of medical devices. We focus on digital health applications, SAMD, AI, wearable technology, and additive manufacturing, and can assist various companies from product conceptualization through prototyping to hardware and software product development, bench and clinical validation, QMS setup, regulatory submissions, all the way through even to ongoing post-market activities once the product is launched. And I'll give Steph an opportunity to talk about Boston Biotech Advisors for a moment before we get started.
So at Boston Biotech Advisors, we focus mainly on regulatory strategy for biopharmaceutical, biotech, and regenerative medicine companies. We also do dabble a little bit in education and advising for early stage startup entrepreneurs in that arena, business development. We also do some website design and marketing for clients as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steph. And we're very excited today to be joined by our guest speaker, Dr. Oliver Idle. Oliver is a medical doctor who very interestingly became very interested in software engineering and learned software engineering, and then also became a regulatory expert, one of the rare people who has such a wide array of skill sets. He is the founder and CEO of Open Regulatory, which publishes free QMS and regulatory templates for companies to utilize, and develops and the organization develops and markets Formwork, which is an eQMS software platform that's intended to enable medical device manufacturers to comply with regulatory requirements for developing and commercializing medical products and bringing them to market. So very happy to have you here, Oliver. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excellent. So I thought we would get started with sort of with the basics more than anything else. We may have people joining the webinar who with various levels of experience with medical device product development. So maybe just to level set so everyone can follow along as we dive into more advanced topics, we'll start with the very high level basics. So maybe, if you can tell us in a few words, your thoughts on, just what is a quality management system and why do medical device manufacturers need to implement one?
Yeah, I guess like the way I tend to explain this to startups, and most of our clients are startups, so that's usually one of the first questions they ask is, what is a QMS? And the short answer is it's a bunch of documents, which of course is not a very useful answer. So like the long story of that is one of the QMS requirements is, for example, that you document all your processes. So you're, as a startup, typically a software startup, you're doing a lot of stuff anyway, because otherwise your company wouldn't exist. You would be like, you're like hiring people, you're developing software, you're like shipping that software maybe. And a big part of a QMS is simply describing those processes. So instead of like developing software in a way where you just kind of like sit across a table and shout to each other and write software code, you have to do it. You have to formalize it more to some degree. So you have to like describe. You would, for example, write a document and you call that document like SAP software development, for example, and then you describe like when we develop software, like step 1 is we write code, step 2 is like we test it or whatever, and step 3 is we ship it in very simplified terms. And you would do that for many processes in your company. So the regulatory requirements, and we mostly focus on EU MDR in our consulting. And there, for example, there's a certain minimum set of processes which you have to document. Like you have to document how you store your documents and records. So in simple words, how you like type up text and, for example, store it in Google Drive. You have to document how you develop your product, how you test it, that sort of stuff. However, there's also more stuff during QMS, but I guess I'll just leave it with the short answer. And you might be the better person to expand upon that if people are interested.
Yes, and on the FDA side, it's actually relatively similar to on the EU side. Just maybe to go back to that question a little bit and dive into it. The other half of that was, why do medical device companies need to have a QMS? Why do they need to implement one? And perhaps this is a very simple question.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to get market approval, like
Exactly.
depending on where
Yep.
you want to go to market, like in the US FDA, for example, where you have the FDA you have to apply to for approval, and in the EU, the system as always is more complicated. So you have
Mhm.
different, actually crazy, as crazy as it sounds, like different for-profit entities where you can choose which one you apply with. So TÜV Süd is a
Mhm.
well-known one in Germany, which I wouldn't recommend because they're very expensive. But you have like those and like 20 others where you would
Right.
apply, and they kind of like do what the FDA does
Yes.
in the
Yes.
US.
Exactly. Okay, excellent. So I think we've covered what is a QMS and why do device companies need to have one. Maybe could you expand a little bit more on some of the critical standards that are involved in a QMS? What I know, there are internationally recognized standards in the US. There are more specialized standards that are part of the US regulations. In EU, there are other standards that need to be followed, and in other jurisdictions, there are various standards as well. So maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the key standards that would inform the development of a QMS.
So yeah, you have like the ISO 13485, which is like a standard applicable in the EU for
Yeah.
quality management
Hmm.
systems. And then you kind of like have a bunch of different standards which you kind of apply if your company falls into that scope. So for example, you have the IEC 62304, which is a standard for software development in medical devices, which obviously only applies to you if you're developing software which you want to ship in your medical device, or your medical device is software only, for example. Then you have like risk management 14971, usability testing 62366. So they always usually have these numbers. And maybe in case you don't know what that kind of like means, it's usually just like it refers to like a PDF file which you, and I guess it gets crazy again, which you purchase somewhere, and which kind of like spells out, like, for example, the processes was a great example. Like it says like, okay, you have to set up your QMS with this minimum set of processes, and that's, for example, listed in the ISO 13485 PDF in that
Hmm.
case.
Hmm. Yeah, excellent. And very, very informative. And I think all of those collateral standards that you mentioned, the 62304, 62366, apply to the FDA as well. Just to add one little bit of detail around the FDA side of it, I get asked this question a lot. Does the FDA require compliance to ISO 13485? And actually, technically, the answer is no, they actually don't. The US regulations actually hinge on Part 820 of Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, a so-called QSR, or Quality System Regulation. So technically, companies wishing to access the US market technically do not need to have ISO 13485 certification, as you were describing, working with the for-profit notified bodies and so forth. But they do need to comply with the QSR, and the QSR, coincidentally, is very highly aligned with ISO 13485. So I actually tend to advise companies, my clients, look, if you're aiming to be global, you may as well just get ISO 13485 certification. And I know that's something that formwork and open regulatory can really help to support. So that's really great. And it's also maybe interesting to note that FDA is actually changing their regulation to now what they're calling the QMSR. And it's going to be some time before this takes effect, but that's even more highly aligned with ISO 13485. So I think getting that certification and building a QMS that complies with ISO 13485, like you were mentioning, Oliver, is definitely very, very useful for companies to move forward with.
Cool.
Excellent. So we've covered quite a bit of stuff here, and I should add, for anyone in the audience, if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we will get to them shortly as soon as we're done with the fireside chat portion of the webinar. We will get to the audience questions as well. Yeah, so I think we talked a lot about the regulations and the standards and the SOPs that are involved and so forth. Setting up a quality system. This, for someone who's never done it before, this may be something that is complicated and daunting. Oliver, in your experience working with perhaps even companies that are doing this for the first time, what do you see as the greatest challenges, and how do startups, how should they go about thinking about overcoming these challenges in setting up a QMS, let's say for the first time?
Yeah. I mean, like, I guess like the biggest challenge generally is at startups you have a lot of chaos, right? So it's usually like, I guess the stereotype is somewhat applicable, that it's like three people in a garage. Where the irony is, like in Germany, you're not allowed to work in a garage, but generally speaking, it's like three people sitting somewhere and building stuff. And now it's kind of like someone comes along, usually a regulatory consultant like us, and says like, okay, you need to write like these 20 SOPs for these processes in your company, which poses many different challenges. So one obvious challenge is who does it? Usually it's like three developers, software, hardware developers, and they're like, we know how to build stuff. Why should we start writing weird documents? And it is a bit of a difficult question for sure, but you have to solve it nonetheless. And outsourcing this to consultants is usually a terrible idea, because you want to, I guess consultants do have their place, but you want to like help the companies document the way in which they do stuff, which sounds really intuitive. But some companies kind of like think they can just get a magic document from a consultant, which is perfect, and they don't have to touch it anymore, and they never have to deal with it, which is unfortunately not true. Um, and the second question, besides like, okay, who does it, is how do you do it? Because there's a certain, I guess, like, if you want to call it like culture mismatch between how startups operate and what a quality management system needs. Like, I guess like the quality management system philosophically mostly comes from larger companies. Like in larger companies, like you document processes in case a new person is onboarded, and that person can, well, that's at least what regulators think. That person reads this document and is perfectly informed and can take up that job and not harm people. That's like the big company idea. However, in startups, by default, nothing is documented. It's like all the knowledge lives in people's heads, and they just kind of like communicate this verbally, usually in meetings. If someone is onboarded, they probably like sit next to one of the other people or work together closely for like a while, and then after a while they've learned it, and this actually works pretty well. But now you have to tell the startup like, hey, you have to change how you work and actually work in the slightly more clunky enterprise way, and this doesn't go over very well. Um,
Yep.
there are certain pros and cons of this, and I think we might get to those or we might not.
Yeah.
But I would say those are like some pretty huge challenges, like from daily practice, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely have experienced exactly that on both sides, as as a consultant as well as a full-time employee working at a medical device company. It's kind of the chaos. Often I think typically in most startups and in most companies, the way you try to resolve chaos is, it has to be a top-down approach. The senior management has to be bought into the process and really drive that through the culture. Maybe could you talk a little bit about what is the role of senior management, executive management at a company as it relates to a QMS?
Yeah, I mean, it has to like they have to like support the lower employees, or the employees
Mm-hmm.
which are in the hierarchy beneath them, to
Mm-hmm.
actually implement this. And that's kind of easy said, but it's not really that trivial. So if you don't have like the buy-in from the higher people in the hierarchy, then it usually just fails completely, because
Right.
you need you need to make this a priority, and usually this is a terrible sell internally. Like you have to, so the only way to sell this is like, okay, we can only do this if we, because otherwise we can't go to market, full stop. So it has to become like a company priority. Because the problem
Right.
is like if you just if like some person just delegates it to some person, I don't know, somewhere in the hierarchy, then that person will realize, for example, hey, this actually makes us change the way we do development. So maybe we have to do more rigorous software testing as an example. But
Mhm,
if this is
mhm.
only a low-level employee and it isn't like a high-level priority for the company, that now that low-level employee can't just go ahead and change the development process of the entire company. So you need like this buy-in
Exactly.
from senior people. And I guess that's just one of many points, but that's probably the biggest one.
Exactly. And in fact, the FDA regulations and I believe ISO 1345 also requires the appointment of a management representative who has the authority, as you were describing. You can't just have the responsibility of developing the QMS. You also have to have the authority to implement and enforce the QMS across the board throughout a company. That's actually one thing we do at RX Device Consulting. We offer this sort of management rep as a service to companies to help them get started and really, as you were mentioning, take templates from that they can get from consultants. And a good management rep really will know how to minimize the disruption. You were mentioning the QMS can, the templates and processes can introduce change. And a good management rep, at least what I've seen, is someone who can come in and minimize the disruption, minimize the change, while still making the outputs of the existing processes meet the requirements. So that's something we do at RX Device Consulting, and I believe it's complementary to some of the templates and some of the work some of the technology that you offer at Open Regulatory.
For
And
sure.
that's sort of a segue to my next question. In terms of Formwork and your software platform, how do you see this helping early stage startups, for example, implement their QMS? How do you see Formwork simplifying the process?
Yeah. So the big question always is, do you need the software for your QMS? And
Hmm.
I'm obviously biased as we are, among other things, a software vendor for QMS software. But ironically, my answer usually is actually no, you do not need a software for QMS. So
Hmm.
maybe to expand upon this, it is a bit, if you want to do your tax return and you kind of like expect and you now ask yourself, hey, do I need software for my tax return? And usually tax return software, it does make your life easier because it's like the step-by-step process, and you actually don't have to understand what you're creating. Like you don't understand the actual tax forms which come out, but you just get asked questions, and that's kind of like a fine approach. However, I
Hmm.
think for regulatory compliance, it is a bit the other way around because it's a bit more than filling out forms. You have to really understand the content of the stuff you are creating. So it's you
Hmm.
unfortunately can't have like a wizard where it's like step-by-step questions and then magical stuff comes out and you don't have to understand that and you hand that to an auditor. You'll be completely screwed with that approach because the
Yes.
auditor is going to come back and ask you questions about all the documents you created. So the first
Hmm.
step, which for compliance for any startup is unfortunately you have to understand the subject matter. So that could be as simple as reading the standards yourself. They are kind of like not easily readable, and the ISO standards you have to pay money for, but there are some hacks around that. You can buy them in Estonia, by the way, in Europe, which is an interesting hack. You pay like 30 euros each.
Gentle
Like read
bedtime
those.
reading.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. You fall asleep while reading. It happened to me multiple times actually when I read them. Um, and then so read the standards, kind of like understand the whole topic, and actually then maybe create like a crappy system, like just create, because the focus should be on the content, not on the method. So like maybe create a crappy
Hmm.
Google Drive folder and just like write out how you think the documentation might look like. Do that for like 5 or 10 documents, and then when you have like a rough idea, um, then you can like look for software. It's a bit like if you want to write a novel, you don't ask yourself,
Hmm.
hey, what's the perfect text editor to use? Instead,
Hmm.
you just start writing first and focus on the content. The same as here. And then Formwork is very interesting because it automates a lot of, I call it like it has like 1,000 small features which make your life easier. So for example, you could use Google Drive, but it doesn't have like super compliant FDA e-signatures, for example, and you need those to sign
Hmm.
documents. So you have that in Formwork, and with like past a couple FDA product audits. So our customers have passed with the software, so the feature seems to be compliant. And a whole lot of other stuff. Like you can do employee trainings, and it does like a nice multiple choice trainings questionnaire thing and creates nice spreadsheets which you can hand into your auditors. You can document like your software features and how you tested your software, and then it like maps those and versions those. Like to a technical person, I call it, it's a bit like Git in a user interface. So you have like a version control aspect to it, so you can document each version of your product, and then Formwork kind of like calculates the differences in features and tests, and you get super nice reports out of that and can hand that in. So do you need it? No, but you probably save a gigantic amount of time and effort with it, because if you like roll your own solution, which we see sometimes in Google Drive or Confluence, Jira is also super popular.
Yep.
You always have the risk of it kind of like completely exploding in your face. Like maybe you edit something and you notice, oh damn, it shouldn't have been editable because it was an ancient version of the software, and we need to archive those ancient documents, and then you're like super screwed. So that's the short answer.
Yeah, excellent. That's really fantastic. So just a follow-up question on Formwork, or a couple of questions, really, just to kind of get everyone to better understand what it is. How widely used is Formwork, and how many customers, and from my perspective, I guess selfish perspective, how many U.S. customers that are seeking FDA targeting market access in the U.S. Do you guys have? And then secondly, I guess maybe let's start with that question in terms of like
Mhm.
the US customers, and how applicable is it to how extensible is it to access to US regulations being used in to meet US regulations?
Yeah. So currently we have like a couple thousand companies using Formwork. However,
Wow.
that number isn't a great number because Formwork has a free tier. So um, we do screen companies for actually being real companies and not like just
Hmm.
random test user 1, 2, 3. So
Hmm.
those are actually real companies. However, Formwork being free, we don't really track usage that much. So it doesn't mean we have thousands of companies using it right while we're speaking. So it's probably less than that. My gut feeling for like FDA companies would be maybe 20% or 20, 30% of our of the companies using Formwork are targeting FDA compliance.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
And
So
how many of those have gone through an FDA audit? Or I know since we have a mutual client, I know there's at least one that has received FDA clearance. How many have gone through FDA audits
yeah.
with Formworks?
So truth be told, I actually don't know. I only hear of those where I kind of like follow up on them because I see the company name which registered, and then I sometimes
Ah,
get the idea like, hey, I should actually be randomly Googling companies. So there are at least like 5 companies I found which had like a successful outcome there.
excellent,
Um,
excellent.
there might be more, and I was also
Hmm.
just very lazy with that. But that being said, I don't think the number is like in the hundreds or so, because not even because our software is crappy or good or whatever, but simply there's like this statistical phenomenon. You have like a bunch of digital health startups like getting founded, but then only
Hmm.
like a few of them get funding. And then even less
Hmm.
of those kind of like go towards an audit. And then of
Hmm.
those, only a tiny fraction actually makes the audit.
Right,
So
right.
I guess we are one observer in that game essentially. So
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, but those are the numbers.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. No, it's that's fantastic that you actually have US customers. My understanding was that your primary, based in Germany, because you're based in Germany, your primary target base would have been in Europe, but it's very exciting to see that you have US customers as well. And I can say that I have used Formwork, and I do find it intuitive and very easy to use, and easy to get things going. So congratulations on developing the platform. That's great.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
yeah. One other question on Formwork. There are, as you were mentioning, there are competitors to Formwork. There are other EQMS software platforms like, Greenlight Guru and Qualio, I think, are a little bit
Hmm.
popular. I know some people use JAMA, or even Jira directly, as you were mentioning. Matrix ALM is another one that I've seen in the past. And as you were earlier mentioning, some people try to do this on their own, either, the old school, the paper-based system. I don't see that very much anymore. Or Google Drive, as you were mentioning, or just a shared folder on, SharePoint folder kind of thing. What is Formworks' unique selling point compared to the competitors, the EQMS competitors that exist, as well as the DIY, do it yourself kind of approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like why I got into this business. I didn't actually get into regulatory compliance because I personally thought it was very fun. I'm actually more a developer at heart. However, I just thought like someone has to do it and make this industry more transparent. At the time, it was by offering free templates. So you can go to our website, download free EU MDR templates, no strings attached. And I kind of like saw the same with EQMS software. So the existing systems out there, as a consultant, I think I remember working with Qualio at some stage at a client. They are like okay, they're not like super great software. Like you won't go out of there and think like, oh man, this was an Apple like experience. So it's more like a Windows 95 experience, especially a Matrix. Um, but what really like irked me about that was the business models. Like the business models were super, I guess like I can't be too insulting here, but let's just say super intransparent, right? So like it's like you go to the website and it's like there's no pricing list. You have to like contact sales, and then what essentially happens is they have a sales call with you and they try to extract the most money out of you possible, which leads to crazy things. Like for example, I've seen US and European companies get way higher price quotes than, for example, Asian companies because they have less money, but
Wow.
the sales teams are like optimizing for extracting money out of these companies. And it has all
Mm,
sorts of crazy other properties too. So if you need more user seats for your account, suddenly your price goes up. With some of the companies, you have to commit to like 3 years, which is crazy, right? You have a
yeah.
demo with a non-technical salesperson, and based on this demo, without actually getting an account and actually test driving it in your actual company, you have to commit to 3 years payment in the like probably a
Wow.
five-figure sum, which is completely crazy. And I kind of like thought that was insane. So that was like where
Wow.
Formwork came in. I don't even claim that any of our software features are much better. I think like all in all these systems are like quite similar, but Formwork just should have transparent pricing. And one of those things was okay, um you can sign up for free. You can sign up for free on our website. It's just like all other SaaS out there outside the e-commerce
Mhm.
industry. So you can sign up for free, you can try out all the features, you get an automatic trial, and you can even upgrade for free. You can just enter your credit card details and upgrade, and the pricing is very simple. It's 50 euros per month for early stage startups and 500 euros per month for all others. And that includes
Wow.
unlimited seats. So it's
Wow.
literally no hidden costs. You go for the 500 euro per month offer, you've got everything in there.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, and it's no commitment, so you can cancel monthly. There's no kind of like crazy lock-in, so you can export your data anytime too. So you can say 1 month to another, you can just hit the button and say like cancel. You don't even have to talk to a human. Export your data with another click and move to another system, Google Drive, for example. So that
Wow.
that was
Wow.
the actual innovation, I think.
Yeah, yeah, phenomenal. And just for comparison, I would imagine some of these other QMS platforms are in the 25,000, 30,000 per year,
Mhm.
just for comparison. So highly cost effective. And as we say, what you were describing, we refer to that as nickel and diming here in the US. So
Yeah,
there it sounds like there's no nickel and diming through Formworks, very transparent pricing. So that is really fantastic, and it's extremely affordable for startups, which is wonderful to hear.
for
So,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, excellent, excellent. So, these days, maybe kind of switching gears a little bit, these days, there's no conversation is complete without, discussing AI and its impact on any industry. So maybe can you talk to us a little bit, and of course, there's a big opportunity for things like generative AI to streamline and simplify, uh, whether it's SOP development or following processes and so forth. Is there anything that Formwork is doing in this space? And can you elaborate? I know you can't say anything proprietary or confidential, but if there's anything you can elaborate on what Formwork is doing on AI and what clients can expect in the future, would love to hear more about that.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, with AI, we've kind of like seen it's a bit less magical than everyone thought when ChatGPT came out. Like we haven't replaced like it's not like everyone became instantly unemployed yet. So AI isn't like as magical as it initially was hyped up. But nowadays, I think the real AI use cases are kind of like coming to light, and one of that is. For example, in coding. So in coding, you have like now these AI text editors where you have like a much better autocomplete feature. So you hit tab and it like auto completes the code you wanted to write, and it's very impressive. So I
Mhm.
think actually that's the direction we will also see in many other SaaS products, including Formwork. So it won't like replace a consultant in the sense of like, look, it will show you from start to finish how to do everything, and you never really have to talk to a human for that, but it will become somewhat a better autocomplete. And examples of that could be, okay, you've documented a couple software requirements or design inputs for your device already, and now the software suggests like another one, and you just like have to accept that suggestion. Or you could
Mhm.
like it's already possible for writing code. You've documented your design inputs, and maybe the software suggests your system test, the way you should test
Mhm.
that. You should test your software for regulatory compliance. And
Mhm. Mhm.
same for documents too. We already have some AI features. So for example, there's a feature where you like have a document template. And again, our templates are free, so they're integrated in Formwork. And you just like add a prompt and say like, okay, my company is a 5-person company headquartered in the US, for example. And then Formwork takes the template, adapts it to your company and creates it as a
Oh.
draft in your folder. So again,
Mm.
that's not like it's not like instantly making anyone unemployed, or it's not like super magical, but it's like it's cool because it's just like very convenient. Like, oh, I didn't have to
Yes,
copy paste this
yes.
template by myself, and I didn't have to go through it line by line. But all like the slightly annoying stuff, like replacing company names and templates, for example, that's something which LLMs are, I think, pretty good at.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that's really, really great stuff. I think as you said, AI is not there as yet to replace consultants or regulatory professionals or QMS professionals, but it really
Yeah.
is streamlining the workflows. So that's fantastic to see you guys are already doing some of this stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so maybe I wanted to switch topics a little bit, and maybe talk a little bit about biotech and pharma. I often have a lot of clients, particularly those that are in the digital health and wearable technology space, and they seek to engage with pharma companies before they have FDA clearance. So, with the idea being generating some initial revenue to have their devices, for example, be used in clinical trials, as an example. And so they sometimes tend to be, as you said, the two guys in a garage. They may
Yeah.
be, often maybe a little bit bigger than that, have a little bit of funding in place, but the QMS is perhaps the last thing on their mind. They're focused on building a
Hmm.
world-class medical device product that can be utilized and can potentially save lives. But often, though, big pharma will actually come back to them and say, "Well, we expect you to have a QMS in place." And Steph, this is also in your wheelhouse. Is this something
Yeah.
that you also see as well as a biotech consultant?
Yeah, most definitely. And just as medical device companies have manufacturing compliance requirements, the FDA does impose these similar requirements on biopharma companies as well and regenerative medicine companies. So these companies need to comply with these requirements, and they need their vendors of their digital health products that they might also utilize in a clinical trial to have these QMS systems in place. And, we'll have to audit them to ensure that that's in place. But, in certain situations where having a QMS in place can actually be an asset to these companies, we can start to generate incomes for these businesses with pharmaceutical partners.
Yeah, I definitely see that a lot where, having a QMS and going to a pharma company with a QMS in place, just gives you so much more positive visibility, positive, just be viewed in a more compliant and positive way by the pharma partners. Is this something you see as well, Oliver, and particularly in the EU? Do any of your
Yeah.
your clients do this, engage with pharma companies and need to set up a QMS beforehand?
Yeah, sometimes. Although I've seen it like happen less frequently for sure. However, that might just be my sampling bias of those companies which end up being our clients or which end up talking to us. But I've seen this happen for sure. Like some startups, and I think ironically, those are often the startups which end up surviving and becoming profitable. Those are going for pharma corporations. So they don't try to like enter the market via like being reimbursable, for example, like B2C or whatever, or going to insurances. But some target pharma corporations from the start. So like develop something which then can be used in trials of pharma companies or in R&D in the broadest sense. And there, yes, for sure. It kind of like gets super fuzzy what those requirements then end up being, as they tend to also depend on what the specific pharmaceutical company would want of their suppliers. But setting up a QMS is something I've seen being required quite a few times.
Yeah, yeah. I often see it a lot with 62304 being required by pharma companies for
Mhm.
SAMD providers, for example. So yeah, that's fantastic. All right. So I guess, yeah, Steph, is there anything else that you wanted to add on that topic?
Um, so I wanted to open it up to some questions that the crowd might have at this point, during our last few minutes that we have for our webinar. Some of this we already touched base on a little bit, but I noticed some people were coming and going from the webinar, so I'd like to open that door again. For Oliver, so how do you see QMS evolving with the increasing integration of AI and digital tools in MedTech specifically? And you did talk about this a little bit, but what steps can companies take to future-proof their systems?
Yeah. So in the past, we've seen a few medical device companies go for, well, medical device approval with machine learning software. This was like in the Stone Age, so like 10 years ago, or in the past 10 years. And there, like the minimum stuff you would have to do was, okay, somehow integrate the AI aspects into your regulatory documentation. For example, that means if you have an SOP for how you develop software, you might also need an SOP for how you train your machine learning models and how you test them. That was kind of like the bare minimum, and that for like many other sub aspects, like how do you acquire your data, how do you ensure that your training data is actually like kind of like good training data. Now this, of course, gets more complicated in the EU, as always with the EU AI Act. So the AI Act is kind of like now an official regulation, which adds even more regulatory requirements to that. So what companies now kind of like will have to do in the future is essentially pretty much all the same. You have a QMS and you have to add the AI stuff into that, but it's simply more because like the AI Act kind of like comes up with even more requirements. Some of them are somewhat irrational, but long story short, your QMS just gets larger, which is like, depending on your standpoint, it's a good or a bad thing.
Thank you. Let's see, does anybody else have any questions in the audience? Okay, so another one for you, Oliver. For startups in these smaller med tech firms that have limited resources, which seems to be those that you cater to a lot, what are the most critical QMS components that people should prioritize for regulatory compliance that ensures long-term growth? Like top three.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay, like top three. That'll be interesting. I mean, okay, maybe number zero first would be like kind of like focus on what your goal and potentially your client is, for example. Like as we actually touched upon earlier, that was a good point, is if you're catering to pharma companies, they might have slightly different QMS requirements than if you kind of like just go for like general FDA approval or EU MDR approval. So that might influence that. Now, with those things kind of like totally aside, most critical things I would say, like step one, how you develop software, like describe the process, how you develop and test your software. And it could just be literally how you do it right now. It doesn't have to be compliant. You would just document it like, hey, this is how we develop software right now and how we test it. And that would be pretty cool to have that like written down. Um, and then I don't have a two and three. That would be number one. And if you have that, you're already pretty good. It already puts you in the like top 90% of chaotic startups regarding regulatory compliance. And
Yeah.
then Yeah.
Sorry, just to add to
Definitely.
that, I actually love your answer because, my philosophy is always that med device companies need to focus on building their product, not on QMS. That is a something you have to have. But if you want to survive as a medical device startup, you need to focus on building your product. And you get the QMS in place. But, the most foundational thing, as you said, is your product development, software development, processes. And you need to have those as streamlined as possible and with minimum disruption to what you already do by default, what your development teams already do by default. So definitely loved your answer on that.
Cool.
See what other questions are coming in. Okay, from the audience, how can a robust QMS contribute to not only compliance, but also competitive advantage, particularly in the markets with stringent regulatory requirements like the EU or the US?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Because question is like what you consider a competitive advantage. So one obvious answer could be, look, it is a competitive advantage that we can enter the market and our competitor can't because they don't have the QMS. So it's like, okay, you have market entry, but like, does it provide any benefits on top of that? It really depends because I'm somewhat very opinionated there. I think like I don't know much. I don't know as much about the US, but in the EU, stuff tends to become extremely overregulated. So the general idea of a QMS, I think, is a good one if you would leave it up to the companies to kind of like take the most useful parts out of that. Like, okay, instead of a chaotic startup, you have now a startup with less chaos, shipping software which has less bugs and which maybe gets done even faster. That would be very awesome. And you have like a process for properly testing your software and a process for maybe treating customer feedback and complaints very well and fixing that in your software. That would be extremely cool. So the QMS idea at its core would lead to better products and would indeed be a competitive advantage. Maybe like it would be super interesting to talk to someone at Toyota 40 years ago who kind of like where the Japanese cars became much cheaper and of better quality than US and German-based cars, manufactured cars at the time because they had better quality management. Like they had all sorts of innovative practices at the time. So the general idea of it is very cool because it leads to better products. Now, I'm not really sure if the way it is actually enforced currently in the EU and US is still in this spirit. Like because I've been in many EU audits, and the spirit doesn't really seem to be like, look, we want to help you as a manufacturer build really cool stuff and build really safe stuff. It's more like, hey, you have a typo in your document and you cited the wrong regulation with the wrong like version number or the wrong year as a reference. And then it's like, okay, none of this has really helped literally anyone. So we're just like discussing typos here. And that is quite unfortunate that that's happening a lot in the EU nowadays. But to answer your question, long story short, the general spirit and the core of the QMS would lead to better products, and that would be really cool. However, it's probably not what we're calling QMS nowadays. It's just like software companies which have like really good processes. And it's not necessarily limited to like the MedTech space, but generally speaking, yeah, those are good ideas.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think it's very similar to what you were saying. I think a company having a strong QMS that is driven not by the quality department, but is actually driven by the product development department. If if the QMS is able to absorb all of the best practices and industry best standards, that could be something that is highly could be an asset to startups because now you have the culture of quality sort of throughout your organization just by default because you're following your QMS will just mean largely will mean following your existing industry standard best practices. You may need to do some small tweaks to comply with regulations and so forth, and unfortunately, there's no getting around that, at least at the company level. But the idea would be, I think that having a strong collaboration between product development and other functions within the organization, really driving the QMS, not being told what to do, but really telling the quality department this is what we should be doing. I think those kinds of organizations I see to be have that competitive advantage and be able to enter and sustain staying in the medtech market.
Awesome.
Mhm.
See if there's more. Another one for Oliver. What are some common misconceptions that MedTech companies have about leveraging these systems as a strategic asset, and how can they overcome these?
Yeah, I think like the number one misconception would be like it's just overhead and crap, and we don't want to do all of that, which is probably every startup says that to me. Yeah, and overcome it by yeah. Well, I mean, I think Rakesh summed it up really well. That like it really helps you like build better stuff, and it should be driven by the engineers and not necessarily by the quality people in a company, and then it can be like super beneficial. um but this is kind of like also circling back to what I said earlier, like okay, the general idea of a QMS is really cool for your company because okay, it leads to like better products, more innovation, safer products, all of that stuff. So that's kind of like what you have to explain to them. However, I do kind of like like confess that this sale is increasingly harder to make again because the way regulations are enforced is often no longer in this spirit. Like it's no longer about like helping companies make sure they ship innovative, safe stuff, and it's suddenly just about who can create bigger mountains of paperwork. So you just kind of like have to find this balance between, okay, how can we help a startup actually overcome all of this and kind of like use the good parts of the regulatory requirements or QMS setup, while I guess losing the minimum amount of time on the bad parts, which is just kind of like overhead and compliance, which you need to fulfill.
Right. Mm.
And I guess maybe Steph, maybe if there's maybe we have time for one more question, and then we can perhaps wrap it up if that's okay.
Okay, let's see. Does anybody in the audience have any other questions? No? Give it one more moment to see if people have something that comes to mind. All right, well, I think that leads us to the end of the time that we have today. It's been great. Thank you so much, Oliver, once again. And thank you to our audience for the great questions that we had. If we didn't answer any of your questions, please, you can send us an email and we can get back to you as well. And we can put our contact info in the chat box. I don't know, Rakesh and Oliver, do you want to submit your emails into the chat as well?
Yeah, one sec.
And don't forget to check out our websites. We have bostonbiotechadvisors.com as well as rxdeviceconsulting.com. And Oliver, if you want to put your website in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. We have Twitter. We also have Facebook pages as well. Instagram. Great.
All right, well, great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Oliver. It was great. We will be back within the next month or two with another topic on related to healthcare. So everyone, please be on the lookout for that. And it was wonderful. I had a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
Thank you for
wonderful.
joining
Yeah.
us.
See ya.
All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.